So, greetings everyone. Welcome to this special webinar by Faith for the Climate and Quakers in Britain for this Great Big Green Week. So, it's nice to see a few familiar faces here today. Welcome back. For those of you who are new to Faith for the Climate, my name is Shannon Shah, and I'm the director here at Faith for the Climate. I'm based in London. I will be your host for today's webinar on identifying real climate solutions or true climate solutions. My colleague Rebecca Walker-Wu, who is the Climate Justice League at Quakers in Britain, hosted part one of our webinar last Thursday, which was on spotting false climate solutions. But she's joining us here today as well. So the recording for that webinar is available for you to view now, in case you wanted to catch up again or couldn't make it last week. And I think one of the team, John, will be putting some links in the chat box. So why have Faith for the Climate and Quakers in Britain picked this topic, false climate solutions versus real climate solutions, and how does it link with the Great Big Green Week? Well, the Great Big Green Week this year is all about how we can make all sorts of swaps, small swaps, large swaps, basically any swap from an action or a behavior that's harmful to the earth towards ways of living that are healthier and kinder to the planet and to ourselves. And for Faith for the Climate and Quakers in Britain, we wanted to focus on systemic swaps. Now, what do we mean by this? Well, the Quakers have been working on climate justice and seeing the climate crisis as a product of a broken economic system since 2019. And then the next year at Faith for the Climate, we started developing a very deep and lasting relationship with the Quakers when we worked together on the interfaith contributions to the UN climate talks that were held in the UK in Glasgow in 2021, COP26, where we basically led faith contributions to the debate on loss and damage finance or climate reparations. Now, out of this collaboration at COP26, Faith for the Climate and Quakers in Britain now co-chair a multi-faith advocacy group called Faiths for Climate Justice. So over the last few years, the policies our advocacy group has focused on have included prioritizing the need for adequate finance and other contributions by wealthy nations to address climate-induced loss and damage, as I said, which is experienced particularly acutely by countries in the global south, as well as trying to move funding away from the fossil fuel industry and towards clean energy industries like renewable energy. So it is this last area, defunding the fossil fuel industry and transitioning to a sustainable economy, that is the focus of our webinars for the Great Big Green Week this year. The backdrop to this is we have seen huge progress in public recognition of the climate crisis and the need for us all to transition our economy to a cleaner system using clean energy. But like with any change, we're also seeing a lot of resistance towards this and even disinformation about it from powerful actors who basically currently profit from the fossil fuel systems on which we have become so reliant. And this has resulted in the development and promotion of technologies which, on the face of it, seem quite convincing and seem to address the climate crisis. But when you look at them a little closer, they also perpetuate our reliance on fossil fuels and they perpetuate a broken and unequal economy. Now, Faith for the Climate is a very diverse network. Our members include Christians, Muslims, and Jews of different denominations and schools, as well as diverse groups of Buddhists, Baha'is, Brahmakumaris, Hindus, Sikhs, Quakers, Sukyo Mahikaris, followers of nature religions, other religions I haven't mentioned. So I initially envisioned this webinar to be a long-lasting resource, which is why we're recording it, and a vehicle for all of us together. Because as Rebecca pointed out last week, this is a powerful role that all of us can play as faith communities, which is truth-telling and reminding our government here in the UK about the principles of justice, fairness, honesty, compassion, and equity that should underpin all the decisions that they take. So let's get started. Let me just share with you the agenda for today. So each speaker will have 10 minutes. We'll start with kind of a big picture perspective of what real solutions look like, with some very concrete and real examples that can be put in place now. And then we'll do a deep dive into a very exciting and inspiring solution that's happening right here in the UK. So let me just unshare that now so that I can introduce our first speaker. So Lindsey Fielder Cook is the interim deputy director and representative for climate change at the Quaker United Nations office, QNO. Now, before joining QNO in 2013, she worked in conflict zones in very different contexts and circumstances, including during the war in the former Yugoslavia. She worked on refugee protection in the Israeli-occupied Palestinian territory of the West Bank, and she also coordinated humanitarian efforts in Somalia. Now, Lindsey's work at QNO focuses on climate change and environmental degradation as a peace and justice concern. She engages at an international level with the climate change negotiations and climate science and human rights efforts, all the while seeking to connect international progress with grassroots efforts. And for me personally, I transitioned into this role much more confidently and convincingly back in 2020 because I had some wonderful conversations with Lindsey, which were extremely inspiring, which is why I'm so glad she's here today. So today, she will introduce us to what real climate solutions look like from an international climate justice perspective, and she'll highlight some solutions that are already available at scale. And she'll also share some insights on why some of these solutions are not being taken up, even though they're already there and ready to use. So over to you, Lindsey.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right? Yes, sounds good. Okay. First, thank you, Shannon and Rebecca, for this invitation to speak. And I'm going to ground what I'm talking about today on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which collates all the science, which feeds into all our governments to tell them what's happening. And I'm doing that because in that space, where we are the only faith-based observer at the IPCC, it is a space where you see the politics and the pushback as well as what the scientists are trying to tell us. So I'm using that as a grounding. And I want to start to say first, we are here to speak as faith-based. And for me, that grounds us in our approach to climate policy. Policies that care for people and the planet, which care for God's creation as a whole, which embrace healthy and fair transformations, and which do not shy from identifying the root causes, however uncomfortable or lucrative that they are. And as Toqueer is going to share with you, and he shared with us just earlier before we started, legacy, equity, and relationships. And all this grounds on why we're talking about the policies we do. And as Rebecca said last week, truth-telling, justice, honesty, and equity. So I want to start just briefly with the root causes, and I'm going to quote the scientists from the IPCC, which is human-induced climate change is a consequence of more than a century of net greenhouse gas emissions from unsustainable energy use, and land use change, lifestyle and patterns of consumption and production. So in effect, we're talking about our energy, our agriculture, and our economic systems, and they're all intertwined. And the reason I'm looking at the IPCC is because in collating all this science, they are feeding that back into the climate change negotiations. And not only that, they create these summaries, which our governments read, and those summaries are negotiated by our countries in a plenary in which Quakers can speak. And the reason that's important is if it weren't for this science coming in, the negotiations here in Bonn, which start this week, would basically be about power and money. And increasingly, these IPCC reports are used in court cases. They're used by our climate advocates. They're used when you walk up to your MP and say, hey, they're saying this, you approved this report, why aren't you doing it? And in that IPCC, the scientists can say no. They can say, no, we can't change that wording. But is huge political pressure there. And that's why having observers there is important. And I'm going to list to you a piece of information that the scientists gave us, which the governments threw out. And I will quote to you the sentence which I thought was the most amazing thing they were about to report before it was taken out. And that is urgent, feasible, and equitable near-term options are already available at scale to address climate change and improve human well-being and planetary health. I'll repeat that. Urgent, feasible, and equitable near-term options are already available at scale to address climate change and improve human well-being and planetary health. Some states criticized it, didn't like that, felt uncomfortable, and we were left with the sentence, feasible, effective, and low-cost options for mitigation and adaptation are already available. That blew me away and it became a kind of bee in my bonnet, but I wanted to use that to say it's out there, it's there, and why are some of those options not being sold to us? But I want to look at it from a UK perspective, and as I speak, I want you to think about, does your MP talk about these issues, right? Every country is different. So first slide, Rebecca, if you can put that up. I'm going to start with energy. And this first slide is something that I love because it says it all to me about what we could be doing with effective and healthy and equitable climate action. I want to say within energy, as you all probably know, but 2/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions are related to fossil fuel CO2, and that to limit global warming to 2 Celsius at this time from where we were, is actually going to have a huge amount of fossil fuel unburned. And that the methane issue in this, which is a huge area of the concern, is actually the majority is being pushed through because of our fossil fuel extraction. So here's our little slide that I love. I'll just give you that for a minute. I use this in publications because it's such a reminder of what we could be doing. And when you hear the pushback, you think, but what about having a better world? So I also want to talk in energy. We can go to the next slide, Rebecca. This slide is from the IPCC. It may be hard to see, but what it is it was the scientists basically putting down all the different options, primarily in energy, and the blue is when it's cheaper. So when you look at that, and you can see that wind and solar, these are some of the cheapest options right now, and they are cheaper in most regions around the world than fossil fuels. And not only that, we're seeing large-scale battery storage increasing on electricity grids with improvement, et cetera, et cetera. But within energy, when your MP is talking, we should be hearing about the electrification of effective and equitable public transport systems, talking about urban green infrastructure of your towns and cities, talking about energy efficiency, and actually talking about energy reduction. Now, how many people talk about that? But it's critical. And I don't know if you had it there in the UK, but during the crisis of energy here where I'm sitting in Germany, the call was out, please use less energy, and it went down by 1/3. So I want to bring in those issues because I also want to show you in this chart, and we can send out this chart to everybody. You can see that some of the most cheaper options are actually about reduction, about efficiency, as well as renewable energies. And also I want to talk about transformation, because when you use energy sources, you can transform it in terms of ownership. And that's another faith-based call for us, because 10% of the wealthiest people use up to 45% and create up to 45% of greenhouse gas emissions. And when you actually own your renewable energies, when you own your solar on your roofs, it has a profound effect not only in your ability to pay for your energy, but also in wanting to be aware and reducing your energy. And so one of the ethical questions for us is, why aren't we supporting the poorest people to have solar on their roofs? It's called decentralized ownership. And certain countries do it better than others. And in transformation on energy, I just want to say that if you're being told that carbon dioxide removal, that is large scale production of bioenergy or planting trees, or if they're looking at carbon capture storage, these large scale projects come with massive risks. And in the room with the IPCC, we had to fight to get that risk language back in. We had to fight because it was not even in the summary. They had omitted it. They didn't want it listed. For example, carbon capture storage, The risk language says it faces technological, economic, institutional, ecological, environmental, and socio-cultural barriers. And we had to fight to get that in, and they put it in as a footnote. And for example, when they talk about cement, yes, we use CCS for cement because that's a very hard to abate emission. But nobody was talking about could we just reduce our use of cement? So that's why it's important for us to ask these questions when we're being told. I want to slip to food and land. Could you move briefly to the third? Thank you. So food and land, when we talk about agriculture, well, food, our pre and post production is 21 to 37% of greenhouse gas emissions, and it's industrial agriculture that is the big problem here. So when we talk about sustainable agriculture, if we talk about agroecology, agroforestry, conservation of agriculture and forestry, crop and forest rotations, organic farming and integrated pest management, rainwater harvesting, pasture management, improved forest and crop grassland management, reduced food waste and loss. When we look at our land, we talk about natural green and blue infrastructure, urban forestry, green roofs. There is so much we could be doing in our communities and supporting that with our taxes. And then our biodiversity, how that supports. But coming into our food with that slide, I just want to say that if you have looked at what you eat and you want to make a contribution, it's the most easy, wonderful, and healthy way to go about it. And it does make a difference. Yes, vegan is the best, but even if you want to be a flexitarian, yeah, in fact, for vegetarian, you see how it shifts what you can use, and it's also about reducing. And one statistic that always breaks my heart is that livestock make up 62% of the world's mammal biomass, humans 34%, and wild mammals just 4%. So when you're eating and your food and our systems, that's about protecting biodiversity. You can take down the slides now, Rebecca. I want to talk about just briefly in our structures here. When I look about supermarkets, I call them supermarket monopolies. This is going to move into our economics, but what are our business models, our supermarkets, which harm the farmers and actually rely on waste? And what can regulation do? Let's support that side of regulation and not be afraid. And then finally, coming into economic systems. I know this sounds big, we're looking for big ism, but actually, what if we were looking at how we do it regionally? IPCC will tell you that globally, economic and population growth continue to be the most important drivers of increases of carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuels. But actually, population growth remained roughly identical to the previous 3 decades, while the contribution of economic growth rose greenhouse gases sharply. So looking at our public transport is actually a mitigation. It's a way to reduce, yeah? Supporting public transport, supporting public health, the NHS. Supporting public health is something that scientists say is important for our climate work. Supporting public education and within public education, talking about climate change, nature protection, teaching children to cook. Just transitions is really important. How do we support our workers? And then modernize our democracy. In the UK, in 2015 election, you know this, but I just love to quote it because it breaks my heart. 1,139,682 people voted for the Green Party and received 1 MP. So investing in futures in our industries and looking at capitalism, just looking at what happens when you have a system which is looking at using unlimited levels of natural resources when we live on a planet with limited natural resources. Talking about sufficiency or circular economy, there's a lot that you can do regionally, like Amsterdam as a city is implementing certain approaches within its city and including environmental cost and pricing, removing fossil fuel subsidies, talk about a wealth tax, talk about the wealthiest and how they contribute and how we can look at polluters pay, aviation tax, fossil fuel extraction tax, financial transaction tax. These things can be done and they're being held back. Why? Because who is actually holding the power and who's speaking and what more could we say? And then just finally, debt forgiveness is huge in our international work. Tax excessive land ownership, look at our council tax on real assets rather than on income for our taxation, and shifting military expenditure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lindsey. That was amazingly comprehensive, but also so specific. And I think we all appreciate that incredibly. There'll be time for questions later, but I will move on now to our next speaker because we're running slightly behind. But our next speaker, and we're really glad he's joining us today, is Toqueer Ahmed Quyyam, who is a passionate and dedicated award-winning eco and social justice campaigner with over 7 years experience. He's worked with a broad range of organizations such as Footsteps, and we've got some members of Footsteps from Birmingham here today. Welcome. Also with Retrofit Balsall Heath, and also connecting diverse communities to eco actions in Birmingham and the Black Country. So today, Toqueer will talk specifically about Retrofit Balsall Heath as one example of a real community-led climate solution. So over to you, Toqueer.
Well, thank you, Shannon Shah, for inviting me here, and thank you for everyone who's attended today. It's just wonderful to see everyone. Where do I start? I think I don't have long to talk about the history, but I think histories are important, where people come from and how areas kind of evolve over time. So that's worth looking into. But Retrofit Balsall Heath, it's about community. It's about improving people's quality of lives where they are, and whoever people are, no matter what faith they come from. As somebody who's a Muslim and somebody who's been involved in interfaith work, I'm a strong believer that community is about everyone, and nobody should be left out. Retrofit Balsall Heath very much started a few years ago, in 2022. There was some funding from the government, from that was left to the city council. The city council got in contact with a local mosque called Bahu Trust to see whether they could utilize the funding, and because there was a sense of community and lots of different organizations worked together anyway, they got everybody in a room and saying, let's unite on this issue, that we need to improve and insulate people's homes. Balsall Heath has a lot of Victorian houses, and very much they're poorly insulated, damp, and they use local community champions, people that were well known to people in the area. They knocked on doors, and they had 1,400 people sign up. And they had funding for about 700 homes, along with ACOX Greener. And the key lessons, I think, to learn from this is actually, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. We already have the talent in our areas, in our communities. We just need to make sure that people just need to come together and work together better. And that's what they did. So there's about 30 organizations across Balsall Heath, from women's group to cycling groups. They all kind of meet on a regular basis. I've got some links if that could be shared. So we have a Facebook group, and every month we have a newsletter with all the different activities that we do. Recently, we had a joint Easter and the Iftar Ramadan landed on the same day. So at Balsall Heath Church Centre, we had a joint session where the Muslim community and the Christian community and people of other faiths came together. They celebrate, they opened the fast together, and then there was a session where the Christian community invited the Muslim community and other people of other faith to come and listen to the Easter talk, and a lot of people did that, which I thought was amazing and lovely. So that's the one good example of like how looking at our own religious festivals and what we can do to invite each other, our neighbors, to those kind of events and festivals when we have them. I can go on forever, but some information. So overall, nearly about 700 homes are retrofitted each home got about £10,000, which is not a lot of money. So the work that was done to each house was very much depended on what was needed in each home. So some homes had wall and cavity wall insulation, including solar panels, new gas boilers, but it was such a success because those that had it, the neighbors that didn't have it or weren't interested initially became interested, and so there's a lot of buzz at the moment. A lot more people are really interested to get involved in any future funding because they can see from their neighbors, they can talk to the neighbors who've had the work done. And so this is just a good example. And in Birmingham, we've got something called Green Doors, which I definitely recommend other areas looking into, is where you have a week where people open their doors, and people who are interested can talk to individual people, not these sales people that come from outside, can go in, meet people, see the house, see the work that's actually been done. And it gives people a bit of reassurance and confidence that if they wanted to do things in their home, that they can also do that. And to finish off, I think I don't know if it could be shared by somebody, but there's like 7 different kind of key goals that we have. And it's not about just retrofitting homes, but it's about like I said, improving the quality of life of everyone. So we work with Saheli Hub to do monthly cycling. At the moment, we're working with an avenue called Melrose Avenue, which is about 26 homes, and they've had a lot of they've had like a report, so energy assessment done to their homes, and hopefully we're looking for funding to do that. But it's actually for me, I'm a volunteer, community kind of connector, and hearts and minds for me is key. I think I've mentioned the relationships. I think we have to. It's about listening to people where they are, and I think it's actually about working with people, co-creating people, because I think any funding that comes in, that's construction companies, whatever, they're just going to be interested in just their particular work. They knock on your door. You'll have kids. You're collecting school to kids, and there isn't that respect for your home. And I think we need to. I think I hope you're all welcome to come to see Retrofit Bolslead and the work that you do. And just get in contact with me. Great to see you, because I definitely think this can be replicated wherever you are, and learnings can be made. I don't know what else to say now, but like I said, we've got members of Footsteps here. I've done interfaith work with Footsteps, where we've done energy assessments in places of worship, which is and it could be churches, mosques, and synagogues. And this is a really good way for to connect with places of worship. And at the moment, Footsteps are working on what we call flashcards, which are actually energy cards, which are just conversation cards about tips about what people can do to reduce their energy consumption. But it gets people educated and gets people talking, and that can be downloaded by any organization from the Footsteps website. And I'll share the link to the Footsteps website. And with some funding that Footsteps has had with Esme Fairburn, which is a national charity, we're working on eco projects, 15 of them throughout the year. And I'm working on a website to connect, to tell stories about what's happening in Birmingham, so that people can hear about real life examples of like what it means to people and the difference that it can make. So, thank you for listening. And to finish off, I think that starting anything new can be scary, but we're not starting from scratch. When we bring people together, and we have a focus on knowing where we're heading and what kind of better life that we have, we can definitely kind of have that strength in unity. And the city council listens to us when we have meetings with them, because there's so many organizations and so many individual people which are all saying the same thing, that we want every home in Birmingham retrofitted, insulated, and that's actually of good quality, a decent quality, and so that there's also jobs and people can have a good quality of life. And we're not asking for too much, but because we did all that grassroots work and that unity, and because we've taken ordinary people with us, that gives us strength.
Thank you so much, Toqueer. That is extremely inspiring. And again, we're so glad that you could join us today and share that. And I think what we're going to do now is open this to questions. We've got about 14 or 15 minutes for questions. So I'll just remove the spotlight for everyone. Yeah. So if you could raise a digital hand on Zoom, or if your camera is on, if you raise your hand, I might be able to see you as well. So there's already a question. Okay, Daphne, I see your hand, but I'm gonna go to your. Okay, so you've got your hand up and you've got a question in the chat box. Why don't you unmute and share your question, Daphne?
Yes, thank you very much. Very interesting. My question is really for Lindsey about energy, because wind and solar are intermittent and they don't they're not available all the time. So is nuclear a good idea in order to complement that? Or otherwise, what is the possibility of storage? Because that's not completely straightforward either. And we are talking about electricity as one of the other comments made. I mean, we still have to find other ways for transport if not all transport becomes electricity. Things like the grid as well obviously needs to be upgraded, but it's the intermittency of wind and solar and what do you do about it?
Thank you. Great question, Daphne. Lindsey.
So I think this would go back to the politics. And nuclear is something that actually was reduced in effectiveness on that chart through the discussions, because it is pushed without discussions on the cost of storing the radioactive waste, or the cost of emissions to build, or the cost overall to use it. And I would say if you are doing everything you can to have renewables, both on rooftops, in communities, ownership of turbines, etc., if you had the most effective and equitable invested approach on renewables, and then you saw what you needed left for energy. But what we are often seeing is a push for nuclear and a sidelining of renewables without giving them the option that they need. South Africa had and it was the faith groups who did a landmark case against the push on nuclear because it was being sold. It's also, again, centralizing the energy system. But the battery systems are increasing and improving, and that's why we talk about decentralized ownership. Because when you own or have your community own those sources of energy, you're seeing a very different sharing and use of the energy than if you maintain it centralized through nuclear or through fossil fuels. So I'm not saying that you can't have some, but what we're seeing is that they're not investing in the cleanest first.
Thanks for that, Lindsey. That's really clear. There's another comment from Ian Kerr from Derby about tidal energy. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I had it on my list, but I was so worried about time. Tidal energy for the UK is absolutely, it's not my specialty. And I know that the big project that was supposed to be coming in on your area near Bristol was stopped. I think biodiversity concerns, I'm not sure, but I think it should be used far more than what you are. And of course, Northern Ireland has one of the strongest currents in Europe, as far as I know. So using that where you can, but also being aware of the biodiversity concerns.
Thank you so much, Lindsey. Any more questions? Again, if your camera is on, I can see you if you put a hand up, or you can put a hand up digitally as well. Is it Ian? Is that your hand up?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I'm an engineer and I've looked at a lot of these solutions over the years, and the focus at the moment seems to be on electricity and hydrogen, and that is not the only source of energy. So My house, including many others, we, for instance, use solar thermal for hot water. There's been so much sun this spring, I've had to dump heat during the night. And we've only got a square metre of that. If I were to do that with PV, I would need something like 10 square metres of it and a battery. So you've got to, so things like our swimming pools should all be solar thermal heated, not coming from electricity. Putting heat into the houses, yes, solar thermal, maybe to boost that with a heat exchanger, a bit like a water or air sourced heat pump. We've also got to think about energy density. So at the moment, batteries are not particularly energy dense, which is why cars are doubling in weight by having an electric vehicle. That's not good for the roads. It's not good for our infrastructure, and it doesn't eliminate the problems with air pollution, because with the extra weight and still having the same number of wheels on the road, you're putting extra wear into the tires, extra small particles worn off the road and the tires into the air. You know, it doesn't solve the problem. It just introduces a new one. You know, we've got to think about this holistically, start to finish. Sorry.
No, that's great. Thanks, Ian. Those are great insights. And yeah, I just wanted to see if Lindsey or Toqueer wanted to say anything to that, and then I'll go to Giles, who has a question as well.
I would just absolutely, and I think that's again when we look at the politics, how many of our regions are getting real support for putting in bike tracks? Like I live in Germany. They're everywhere, right? Public transport, they're looking at actually making it free. These are holistic options that actually reduce. I don't talk about electric cars because they're actually profoundly inequitable. Who can afford an electric car, right? And I would say that the most important policies we can do, we should be focusing on the poorest to bring up. And when you do that, you're focusing on, as Toqueer says, your community and your relationships. So that's how we would almost analyze the next step. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I agree about the holistic approach. For example, on transport, a lot of people in Birmingham use buses, but there's for some reason that there seems to be this mindset that trams are the answer. And if you look at the cost per mile for trams, it's a staggering amount, and the delays in Birmingham with HS2. They're unable at the moment to connect the link between the HS2 station that they're building to the tram line that they've already built by the coal station, which they're hoping to take it to the East Birmingham with the Solihull interchange. But what we found is that the huge infrastructure cost and the delays and the times, and it's the opportunity cost, and actually looking at it holistically to see where people are, especially with transport. Actually, most people travel within areas and regions. So I think I'm an advocate and a supporter of local transport infrastructure like buses, and making sure that we get the basics right, like making it's all very well moving towards electric and hydrogen buses, but another challenge of that is the seating spaces are far less. So are we going to have more buses than we have now, and also the volume? So one of the issues that we have in Birmingham is we have volume of buses on certain middleways in Birmingham, and even though the buses are moving towards kind of better efficiency, but the sheer volume of them means that the air pollution is quite bad. But yeah, it's something to think about.
Thanks, Toqueer. That's really great. Giles.
Thank you very much. This is a question for Toqueer, really. I'm chair of South Bank of Waterloo Sustains Us, and we're trying to make this area net zero by 2030. So what advice do you have if people wanted to get a kind of retrofit, something similar to what you're doing so amazingly in Walsall Heath? What advice would you have for us to get it going?
Well, it was a great question. I think every area is different, but the first step would be my invitation to you to come and visit Birmingham and meet with the people who have had their homes done, as well as John Christopher, who was the instigator, along with some of the church leaders and mosque leaders. And to see firsthand, and to bring others with you who are keen, and build that relationship with us in Birmingham. And the best way of learning is actually what I've noticed in my 7 years of volunteering is it's something about experience. There's something about beyond academia. About how do we feel about change. So I hope you can accept. I hope we can exchange and way to connect here, and you're very welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you, Toqueer. And for those who don't know, Canon Giles Goddard is also the chair of Faith for the Climate. He wears many hats. He's also the vicar of St. John's Church in Waterloo. And as I said, he's the chair of our board of trustees and our co-founder. So thank you for that. Charlotte, nice to see you. Please, your question.
Good to be here. Yeah, thanks so much. Those were two really, really fascinating talks and really inspiring. My question's for Lindsey. So it was so helpful to kind of get that behind the scenes picture of the work of the IPCC. We think of it as, it's made of scientists. We think of science as objective, but it was so fascinating to hear that story of how there's negotiation over the phrasing of what's said. That's real political negotiation, and that it's so important that the stakes are so high, because, as you say, increasingly court cases are using the statements of the IPCC to hold governments and other organisations to action. So it really, really matters. How what goes into these reports. Can you just say a little bit more? I kind of, my brain blinked. You said something about the Quakers being the only something or others there. What other religious groups are involved in this negotiation? And is there a possibility of kind of upping that quotient? Because the more, good-hearted, faithful people that we have at the table, the better the outcomes are going to be.
Thank you. And so the IPCC, I just have to write something. Hold on. Okay, so here is the mitigation report, right? The governments can't touch that. This is the summary. That's what people read. That's what they can try to influence. And yes, the scientists can say no, but there are times when it is grueling. So Quakers, since 2017, we were encouraged by the IPCC because we were communicating the science to become an observer, and we did. The Holy See has the right to be an observer, but they have been holding back because they want a higher observer status linked to being able to be a state. And the US was blocking that because if the Holy See got it, Palestine would get it. Now, the US didn't show up in the last IPCC meeting, so who knows, the Holy See might get their higher observer status. We do have, for example, Islamic Relief has a specialist there, but they're part of CAN International Climate Action Network. So we have some faith voices, but they don't speak openly as the faith. And so Quakers are often called the ethical voice in the room because we start talking about how many people will die, what does this cost, why are we not supporting the poorest, those kinds of things that scientists or that language doesn't always feel comfortable in. And the other side that we do have observers, for example, the Center for International Environmental Law, the Green Party, the German Green Party, Heiner Boll. So we have observers there, But as a faith voice, the Quakers remain the only independent voice there. And I thank Friends World Committee for Consultation because they hold us there, and British Quakers who've paid. And I just want to finish off the UK IPCC negotiating team is brilliant. They are several top women scientists. They were the ones who tried to help us get that sentence back into the summary. So you've got a good team there, and most of them are scientists, and they are really trying. And I wanted to share that with you because they'll get a lot of criticism as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to what Lindsey is saying as well. In my experience, working with the Quakers in our capacity here at Faith for the Climate, there are these specific negotiating spaces where sometimes the Quakers might be the lone voice, but as we've discovered over the years, there are so many ways to collaborate across faiths and within faiths. And so much of what we do at Faith for the Climate is made possible because of the Quakers, who sometimes contribute behind the scenes, but they devote so much capacity to make sure that whether it's ecumenical collaboration on climate or interfaith collaboration, it happens. And I think that's why Faith for the Climate exists as well, as a space where each faith group can contribute distinctively, but also how we can collaborate and work well together, and share the best of our strengths and talents with each other. Which leads me very well, actually, to a conclusion, because I think we're at time. Thank you for all your questions, and thank you to our speakers. Thank you, Lindsey, Toqueer, all of you here today. To the team members who haven't spoken yet. So there's John, who's putting things in the chat, to Giles, whom you'll hear from in a little bit. I also wanted to say a special thanks to Rebecca Walker-Wu and our speakers from last week, Anna Lewis from Quakers in Britain, and Dr. Alexandra Masako Gusens Ishii from Soka Gakkai International, which is a Buddhist network. So thank you to all of you. I'd like to take this opportunity maybe to summarize my takeaways from these two webinars. I think for me, one striking thing, because there are so many of these webinars that are talking about real solutions versus false solutions now, but I really wanted to do one that would speak to an audience of people of faith from whatever faith background you come from. And my summary is kind of through this lens, because I think one recurring theme that I'm getting from these webinars is that we can think of two ways of thinking how we think about our relationship to the world around us and with ourselves. One way of thinking emphasizes separateness, distinctiveness, sort of more atomistic ways of thinking. And another way of thinking is one that emphasizes interconnectedness, and it's more holistic. It emphasizes holism. And the thing is, we engage in both ways of thinking all the time. As I'm speaking to you now, I know that I am Shannon Shah. Who am I? I'm a gay man. I'm a Muslim. I'm Malaysian. When I'm feeling flat or down at the end of the day, my idea of a pick-me-up is watching old episodes of The X-Files or Yellow Jackets or this week's Springwatch. That's me. I'm an individual. But I would be living a very unbalanced and unhealthy life if that was all I was and that was my entire worldview, because I'm also who I am because of the web of relationships that have formed me and continue to form me. All the beings that came before me, every single being that I am connected to now, and the beings that they are connected to. And as a Muslim, I know that these are contested terms and different faiths will understand what being means differently. But that's why I think it's really valuable to come together and talk about these connections. Because what I've learned from these two webinars is that really what a false solution is, it's one that focuses on separate particulars, and that's it, to the isolation of thinking about our interconnected, holistic relationship with the planet, with other beings, with ourselves. And when we start looking at interconnections, we will also start identifying what are the power dynamics in some of these relationships? What are some of the inequalities that have created them? What are the inequalities they continue creating? And we will think about how to make this interconnected whole healthier and more balanced and kinder. And I think that's what a real solution looks like. And again, it happens with the Faith for the Climate. We see the faith groups that we speak to as distinct. I talked about Muslims, Jews, Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, Sikhs, and so on. We see the economic system as distinct, sure. But again, like I said, a false solution, I think, is one that just sees this solution as one fix and that's it. Whereas I think the solutions are not self-contained. So things like carbon capture and storage, biomass, they're not magic bullets. It doesn't work that way. Instead, a real solution is something that, even if we're looking at distinctive aspects such as public transport, housing, the economy, we will always consider how they are parts of an interconnected whole. And in that interconnected whole, we will always look at what is the health of this whole and what is the health of its distinctive components as well. This is why we talk about a human rights-based approach, but a human rights-based approach is not enough. Many of us are now talking about what about the rights of nature? What about every single being's right to a healthy environment? And I think this is where faith groups can make the best contribution because we can each draw the best from our distinctive faith traditions, but we don't need to stop there. We can share this wisdom across communities, across faith traditions, whether it's in a local community in inner city Birmingham like Balsall Heath or at UN climate negotiations. And it's really tough to keep up with the technicalities of the debate. I hope you've gotten enough out of the presentations from these two webinars and also the question and answer to help you with the technicalities. But I also think a false solution is one that gets buried in the technicalities. We also need this overall framing of interconnectedness and seeing this issue as a spiritual and moral and ethical concern. So there's ways to keep the momentum going. This is not the end of it. Lindsey was talking about what your MP can do. What do they talk about? How you might be able to influence how they make decisions. So we are in the midst of planning the faith contribution to the mass lobby of Parliament, which will happen on Wednesday, the 9th of July. And we'll be sharing more updates. They're still being confirmed at the moment, but there's a page on the website. And if you sign up to our e-news updates, you will get updates as they come. That's it. That's my spiel for now. I will hand it over to Giles now to close us.
Thank you so much, Shannon, for that really good summing up. I was going to say a little bit more, but I won't because it's 27 minutes past. But I just want to say that listening to Lindsey and Toqueer, I'm just reminded that climate change, it's often referred to as a wicked solution, as a wicked problem, because its ramifications go into so many different areas. But because it's a wicked problem, it also has potentially beautiful solutions. And the beautiful solutions are the ones which Shannon's just really outlined, where we come together, we make the connections. It's not, there are no easy answers. All the answers are complex, but the answers are there if we care to look for them. And they're there when we come together and do things together. I want to finish with a very, very short quote from somebody called Wendell Berry, who's an American thinker and writer. You may have come across him. He says, "We have lived by the assumption that what was good for us would be good for the world. We have been wrong. We must change our lives. And even more important, we must learn to acknowledge that the creation is full of mystery. We will never entirely understand it. We must abandon arrogance and stand in awe. We must recover the sense of the majesty of creation and the ability to be worshipful in its presence." I think that's such an important thing for us as members of faith groups to hold on to, that we need to recover the ability to be worshipful in the presence of creation. And that sense of mystery and majesty is what will enable us to build those relationships which can make the better world, which Lindsey was talking about in her, or showed in the image with which she started. So very, very many thanks to you all for coming. Let's just keep half a minute of silence and hold one another in our hearts, and then we'll end. Thank you all for coming and enjoy the rest of the day. And we hope to see you at the Mass Lobby of Parliament.
Thank you, everyone. Go well. Yeah. Have a good rest of the day. So if the Faith of the Climate team and the Quakers team wanted to hang back, that would be great as well. I will stop the recording now if I can find it. There you go.